Humanity has obviously a lot of issues and people at times do bad things, but despite all that, I love humanity and I think we should make sure we do everything we can to have a good future and an exciting future and one where that maximizes the happiness of the people at the time that we launched. That no one could think of anything at all to do that would improve the probability of success, and we racked our brains to think of any possible way to improve the probability of success, and we could not think of anything more, nor could NASA, and so that's just the best that we could do, so then we went ahead and launched. Now, I'm not a religious person, but I nonetheless got on my knees and prayed for that mission first when the launch was a success. And when they returned back home or back to Earth, it was a great relief. And I think once as we got more comfortable and proved out the systems, because you're got to make sure everything works. It was definitely a lot more enjoyable with the subsequent asteroid missions. And I thought the Inspiration mission was actually very inspiring, the Inspiration for mission. I'd encourage people to watch the Inspiration documentary on Netflix. It's actually really good. And it really isn't, I was actually inspired by that. So that one, I felt I was kind of able to enjoy the actual mission and not just be super stressed all the time. So for people that somehow don't know, it's the all civilian first time all. Civilian out to space, out to orbit. It was I think the highest orbit that in like, I don't know, 30 or 40 years or something. The only one that was higher was the one shuttle, a Hubble servicing mission. And then before that, it would have been Apollo in 72. It was pretty wild. So it's cool. It's good eye. Think as a species, we want to be continuing to do better and reach higher ground. I think it would be tragic, extremely tragic, if Apollo was the high watermark for humanity, and that's as far as we ever got. And it's concerning that here we are 49 years after the last mission to the moon. And so almost half a century, and we've not been back. Also, I think we got to get back to the moon and build a base there, a science base. I think we could learn a lot about the nature of the universe. If we have a proper science base on the moon, we have a science space in Antarctica and many other parts of the world. So that's what I think the next big thing we've got to have, like a serious black moon base, and then get people to Mars and get out there and be a spacefaring civilization during the launches itself. So, I mean, I think maybe some people will know, but a lot of people don't know, is I'm actually the chief engineer of SpaceX. So I've signed off on pretty much all the design decisions. So if there's something that goes wrong with that vehicle, it's fundamentally my fault, so I'm really just thinking about all the things that so when I see the rocket, I see all the things that could go wrong and the things that could be better, and the same with the Dragon spacecraft. Other people will say, oh, this is a spacecraft or a rocket, and this looks really cool. I'm like, I have like a readout. Oh, these are the risks. These are the problems. That's what I see. And actually, by far, the biggest thing of solving my time is engine production, not the design of the engine. I've often said prototypes are easy, production is hard. So we have the most advanced rocket engine that's ever been designed, because I say currently the best rocket engine ever is probably the O-Road 170, the dual Russian engine, basically. And still, I think, again, the engine should only count if it's gotten something to orbit. And so our engine has not gotten anything to orbit yet, but it's the first engine that's actually better than the Russian road engines, which were amazing design. There's a lot of components and a lot of unique materials. So we had to invent several alloys that don't exist in order to make this engine work. It's a materials problem. And in a stage combustion, that full floor stage combustion, there are many feedback loops in the system. Basically, you've got prop B and hot gas flowing simultaneously to so many different places on the engine, and they all have a recursive effect on each other. So you change one thing here, it has a recursive effect here, it changes something over there, and it's quite hard to control. There's a reason no one's made this before, and the reason we're doing a stage. Commotion full flow is because it has the highest theoretical possible efficiency. So in order to make a fully reasonable rocket, which that's really the holy grail of orbital rocketry, you have to have everything's got to be the best. It's got to be the best. It's got to be the best engine, the best plane frame. The best shield against heat, very light electronics, very smart ways to control things. You have to lose mass in any way you can. For example, we're going to catch the landing legs with a tow rope instead of putting them on the booster and ship. Our very talented team is working night and day to make it happen. As I said, the most important thing to have for revolution in spaceflight and for humanity to become a spacefaring civilization is a fully and rapidly reusable orbital rocket. There has never been an orbital rocket that was fully reusable, and this has been the holy grail of rocketry for a long time. Many very smart people have tried to do it before, but they have failed because it's so hard. Quitting is not in my nature. Tesla bot has to solve is interacting with humans and potentially having a place like in the home, so interacting. Not just not replacing labor, but also I don't know, being a friend or an assistant. I think the possibilities are endless. I mean, it's not quite in Tesla's primary mission direction of accelerating sustainable energy, but it is an extremely useful thing that we can do for the world, which is to make a useful humanoid robot that is capable of interacting with the world and helping in many different ways. So in factories and really I think if you say extrapolate to many years in the year, future, I think work will become optional. There's a lot of jobs that if people weren't paid to do it, they wouldn't do it. It's not It's not fun necessarily if you're washing dishes all day. It's like, hey, even if you really like washing dishes, do you really want to do it for 8 hours a day every day? Probably not. And then there's like dangerous work, and basically if it's dangerous, boring, has like potential for repetitive stress injury, that kind of thing, then that's really where humanoid robots would add the most value initially. So that's what we're aiming for, is for the humanoid robots to do jobs that people don't voluntarily want to do. I haven't really thought that far into the future with the Tesla bot, or it's codenamed Optimus. I call it Optimus Subprime because it's not like a giant transformer robot, but it's meant to be a general purpose help robot. And basically the things that were basically Tesla, I think dangerous potentially. So the interventions per million miles has been dropping dramatically. And that trend looks like it happens next year, is that the probability of an accident on FSD is less than that of the average human, and then significantly less than that of the average human. So it certainly appears like we will get there next year. Then there's going to be a case of, okay, well, we not have to prove this to regulators and prove it to. And we want a standard that is not just equivalent to a human, but much better than the average human. I think it's got to be at least 2 or 3 times higher than a human, 2 or 3 times lower probability of injury than a human before we would actually say like, okay, it's okay to go. It's not going to be equivalent. It's going to be much better. So if you look, FSD 10.6 just came out, and Tesla FSD V11 10.7 is on the way. Maybe 11 is coming out sometime in the future. 11 has a lot of fundamental changes to the neural net architecture and some basic improvements to how vector space is made. There are some really basic changes to neural net architecture that will make them much more powerful. At first, they'll have problems like when they're working on alpha software. It's good, but it's basically taking a lot of C code and replacing it with neural nets. Andre makes this point a lot. Neural nets are eating software over time. There's still lines of software, but more neural net stuff and less Harris. Basically, Tesla Autopilot has been through an incredible journey over the past 6 years, or perhaps even longer in the minds of many involved. The Tesla Autopilot AI team is extremely talented. It's like some of the smartest people in the world. So yeah, and we're getting Autopilot done. I thought the self-driving problem would be hard, but it was harder than I thought. It's not like I thought it would be easy. I thought it would be very hard, but it was actually way harder than even that. So I mean, when it comes down to, at the end of the day, is to solve self-driving, you basically need to recreate what humans do to drive, which is humans drive with optical senses, eyes, and biological neural nets. And so that's how the entire road system is designed to work, with basically passive optical and neural nets biologically. So for full self-driving to work, we have to recreate that in digital form. So that means cameras with advanced neural nets in silicon form, and then it will obviously solve for small cell driving. That's the only way I don't. I think there's any other way. I think these sort of control logic conundrums are not the hard part. The hard part in this whole beautiful, complex problem is it's a lot of freaking software and a lot of smart lines of code for sure in order to create an accurate vector space. You're coming from image space, which is like this flow of photons going to the cameras. And then since you have this massive bit stream in image space, and then you have to effectively compress a massive bit stream corresponding to photons that knocked off an electron in a camera sensor and turn that bit stream into a vector space by vector space. I mean, you've got cars and humans and lane lines and curves and traffic lights and that kind of thing. Once you have an accurate vector space, the control problem is similar to that of a video game like a Grand Theft Auto or Cyberpunk. If you have accurate vector space, it's the control problem is, I wouldn't say it's trivial. It's not trivial, but it's not like some insurmountable thing. Having an accurate vector space is very difficult. Your brain is doing an incredible amount of processing and giving you an image that is a very cleaned up image. Like when we look around here, you see color in the corners of your eyes, but actually your eyes have very few cone receptors in the peripheral vision. Your eyes are painting color in the peripheral vision. And then even once you get all those vision signals, your brain is constantly trying to forget as much as possible. So human memory is perhaps the weakest thing about the brain is memory. So because memory is so expensive to our brain, and so limited your brain is trying to forget as much as possible and distill the things that you see into the smallest amounts of information possible. So your brain is trying to not just get to a vector space, but get to a vector space that is the smallest possible vector space of only relevant objects you can sort of look inside your brain, or at least I can, like when you drive down the road and try to think about what your brain is actually doing consciously. It's like you'll see a car because you don't have cameras. You don't have eyes in the back of your head or the side. So you say like your head is like you basically have like 2 cameras on. A slow gimbal and eyesight isn't that great. Okay, human eyes are. And people are constantly distracted and thinking about things and texting and doing all sorts of things they shouldn't do in a car, changing the radio station. When's the last time you looked right and left and rearward, or even diagonally forward to actually refresh your vector space? So you're glancing around, and what your mind is doing is trying to distill the relevant vectors, basically objects with a position in motion, and then editing that down to the least amount that's necessary for you to drive.